To start now. Don't be shy. I know it's after lunch, but yeah. So a question about, is a mic coming to you? Just say who you are and where you're from, please.
Hi, I'm Abby Clay, Director of Student Services at Bradford College. I was very interested in what you were saying. I've just got my employability hat on at the moment, and you didn't refer to it specifically, but are you talking about the benefits of something like the HERE might have for students if that's developed in terms of capturing evidence of skills that may be defined as and used as employability skills, or skills to help them on a postgrad course or direction?
I wasn't talking about the HERE, but I suppose I could have been. I think I'm a little bit conscious now. I don't want to kind of be seen as representing necessarily the views of NUS. This is just me kind of sort of riffing off the question. I think the thing about the HERE is that it's really important for people to have a sense of the ways that the things that they do outside the classroom contribute to their learning and their kind of and their sense of themselves. I think there's also something. I think there's things that the HERE can't reach, and I think it's because it's very focused on that kind of sense of me as an individual being accredited or recognised for my achievements, and it is the higher education achievement report, not the higher education what I got up to report. And so I think it's situated in this sort of discourse of personal achievement rather than personal development sometimes, which I think might limit in some cases, people's sense of how things that they did that they weren't necessarily achieving at, they just did because they were hobbies. So for example, you wouldn't necessarily put in to the HERE that you'd been a member of your student parent group on campus, but you might have got all kinds, you might have really developed lots of confidence and lots of understanding and lots of skills from being in that space and from being in that network of support. So I think the HERE goes a certain way in that regard. And I don't think it's ever been thought of as being necessarily a tool to progress to postgraduate study, but that, yeah, I don't know. that could be a conversation.
Did you have an answer to your question?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
No, did you have an answer to your own question? If you had a comment on that. Is a mic? Hang on.
Sorry, it's not often that I need a mic. Yes, I would agree. I would like it to be a part of that. Here's what I've been up to, and here's the skills that I've accrued along the way. I think it can be useful to the students to see very clearly, blimey, this is what I've done outside of the classroom, and these are the skills that I've developed. So I think it's a part of that, certainly, I would agree. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Henry, there's a question here, and then Fiona down the front.
Maybe before I ask my question, there are a few kind of question marks over what is the HERE. The HERE is the Higher Education Achievement Report, or something, that was put together by the Association of Graduate Recruiters and the Association of Graduate Careers Advisors to allow universities to bring together all of the non-academic achievements for a student to then share with future employers. Okay, my question is on the...
Can you just say who you are and where you're from?
So I'm Henry Morris, the founder of Upreach. We work in partnership with universities and employers to ensure that undergraduates from less privileged backgrounds can realise their career potential. Debbie, in your talk you mentioned a little bit about kind of the social and the cultural capital. I thought I'd throw into mix some work that we've done that identifies what that is in practice. We see that it's knowledge, soft skills, networks and professional experience that kind of make the marginal difference for those undergraduates who say they're first in their family to then realise their career potential. And anything that institutions can do to develop those 4 areas will particularly support those undergraduates from less privileged backgrounds. I don't know if that's knowledge, soft skills, networks, professional experience as things that have come up in your own research.
We haven't done any research on this.
I'm happy to share what we've done with you.
Sure. I mean, it's something I think we're really interested in doing. So we're very mindful that if you want positive outcomes for students, it's got to be linked to the academic experience. As much as we may talk about, participation on sports teams being, A-okay, it's obviously a fantastic experience for those that do it, but it's not where the game's at in terms of retention and success. We're kind of mindful of that. At the same time, we're also mindful that a lot of these, the way the extracurricular activities are framed, as I said, is quite about kind of performing your middle classness. So at the same time, we know that if you want to get into some of these professions, you've got to have the networks and the kind of labour market intelligence to be able, to do that. So there's always a kind of, I think, just taking it, there's always got to be a kind of sort of thoughtful approach taken. And I suppose what we're interested in, and what we hope to be able to do some work on next year, this sort of looking quite far ahead potentially, is about the ways that students' unions frame co and extracurricular activities in a way that they can support learning communities in which people can develop that sort of social and cultural capital, but also the kinds of social and cultural capital that they want to develop, not that necessarily in every case society requires of them if they want to access the top professions. Do I make sense when I say that?
Yeah, and I think that I went to Exeter, and the union, or guild as it's known in Exeter, were really supportive of the Extra Award, which is a kind of employability and co/extracurricular program they do.
Okay, thank you. I think Fiona's next. Hang on, there's a mic coming to you.
Thanks, Debbie, and thanks from the UK for stepping in. Fantastic. My question is about the WP champions that you have. Is it possible to tell us a little bit about what they do? And because my understanding is that it's an excellent initiative, are you going to extend that? And are there any learning points that you can share with us about ways in which they've worked, particularly in terms of a partnership or collaborative working with institutions, which would be useful for us to hear?
Okay, so for context, a couple of years ago when we were just getting into this agenda, we set up a training program which we called WP Champions, and that was for unions who wanted to initiate some activity around access or retention, could come and get a bit of training and support from us. One of the things you may not know about NUS is that our initiatives tend to kind of work on an annual cycle, so we don't have a kind of current bank of WP champions. This was some years ago, but we did have some learning from the experience. One was that unions, by and large, probably shouldn't try and do these things by themselves, not because they don't, not because of sort of lack of competency, but in part because there are a number of unions who do some quite interesting stuff. So Edinburgh University Students Association, for example, does a really interesting shadowing program. So they bring in people and they shadow a student and that kind of stuff. So there is some competency there, and if it's a priority for the union, they can deliver it. What is really important, though, as we know in Access, is the coordinated approach. So, and particularly when it comes to gathering evidence of impact, that coordination works better. So we did encourage, in most cases, the unions involved to have a chat to their institutions. Didn't necessarily get traction in every case. So we had some quite interesting programs set up, but where it worked, it was because it was delivered through partnership and through a kind of sense of a shared agenda, and a sense that what the students were doing would add a specific kind of meaningful value to the program, rather than something that was operating kind of in a silo, in parallel, just because the student union cooked it up, and everyone thought that might be quite fun. So that was basically the learning from that initiative. And from our point of view, it was a success in that it really kick-started the idea that student unions would take part in this agenda. We now have a working group with the National Educational Opportunities Network, which is exploring kind of what partnership looks like in access between students and institutions. So that's kind of what came from that, I suppose.
Thank you. Alistair.
Alistair Thompson, National Institute of Adult Continuing Education. Debbie, my question's not just for you, but for other people in the audience, and that's, are there any examples of good or even interesting practice in engaging with part-time students through their unions?
Anyone?
Yeah, let's try it open. Hang on, Joe, wait till because no one will hear you.
I just wanted to say that the Higher Education Academy has published 3 guides recently on flexible learning that might be of interest to people. If you go onto the Academy site and then go into our resources centre and then click on flexible learning, you will find guides and tools that address your concerns.
Thank you for that information. Any other comments from the floor on Alice's question? No, hang
I think
on. Let someone else have a chance. Debbie, do you want to?
I think this says something about the way sometimes the way we talk about engagement and community building and stuff is you know, as the question I think as sort of very clearly was prompting, that you know we still talk about these things in terms of people who are engaged full time, but I also think that the concept of learning community is one that ought to be possible to be applied across the piece. And particularly, I think it would be really, really interesting to think about the ways that people bring the learning from their workplace and into the curriculum and vice versa. And what it is that higher education does for people who are in the workplace that makes them feel part of a learning community and why that matters. As a part-time student myself, sorry to play that card, I experience this on a daily basis. The fact that I'm studying and the fact that I'm in a learning community that isn't the same as my work community is just incredibly, incredibly important for the sort of the distance and the perspective and the knowledge and the confidence that I have. And I'm able to sit in front of you all and say things. So I suspect it's I suspect it sort of happens. I'm just not sure to what extent it gets talked about, if that's helpful.
Okay. I think we'll leave your question hanging, Alistair, for further thought. More comments or questions? Wow. Yeah. Oh, Joan. Yeah. Hang on, wait for the mic.
Just about belonging again, and you spoke earlier today, Debbie, about your report, Laddism in higher education, and it's an interesting title. I think it's the right title, but of course maybe 20 years ago when I was an undergraduate we would have talked about patriarchy in higher education or sexism in higher education, and I know that there's been a shift in language and that it's not really fashionable to address issues of gender anymore, but it obviously is a serious question because we look at the numbers going into STEM subjects now, and how does that relate to the sort of increasing lack of spaces that women have on campus? We used to have women's room. When I went back to my old university, the women's room had been turned into the athletics union room. Liz and I did some work in Scotland in the last 3 years on the student voice, and where people had been expecting to find concerns about ethnicity in Scotland, we were interested to find out that what students were talking about was gender differences in the classroom. And I just wondered if you had anything to say about your report on laddism in higher education.
The report's called That's What She Said, Lad Culture in Higher Education, and we commissioned it, I believe, from the University of Sussex. And the report demonstrated that, and it was specifically about lad culture. So we have a women's campaign that talks a lot about patriarchy and sexism, and we sort of perceive lad culture to be a kind of a subculture of that kind of bigger problem. The report found that women in higher education are often subjected to the kinds of laddish behaviour that they experience as exclusive and demeaning and really, really negative. And there's some suggestions in that report about how that's tackled, and that's very much, and that's I think is a really good example of where there's a responsibility on the student body to try and engage with some of the problem and not just be like, well, what's the university doing about it? But the bigger problem of women in higher education, that's not what I meant to say, is if Toni were here, she would be talking a lot about this because it's one of her big priority areas, and she's really conscious of that as a challenge. In the WP arena, increasingly we talk about the participation of young working class men, and I think it can quite easily turn into a kind of which gender gets priority in any given time, and of course the issues are rather different. I think the fact that women are now dominant in higher education only goes to show that you really can't measure equality by volume, because those women, despite being in a majority, are not necessarily experiencing the culture as inclusive or supportive to their aspirations. And we had long conversations about what you do about that. Clearly we need more women in leadership. in senior positions in higher education institutions, but we probably also need more recognition of things like life outside the workplace, and there's an awful lot of things that could be being done, and yeah.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. I think we're going to stop there, but before we do so, we're going to thank Debbie for stepping in. Thank you, Debbie. Okay, so just to remind you, it's discussion groups now, and I know you've all signed up for discussion groups. If not, you'll kind of sneak into one. And then we come back here for the final session at 3:45. Okay, 3:45. Thank you.